Financial Argument. Follow us on YouTube.
All right, well, joining me on the line today is our good friend and friend of the show, G. Edward Griffin. He is a writer, a researcher, a documentary filmmaker, and in many ways a crusader seeking to wake up the masses. Mr. Griffin has spent his career focused on shedding light on organizations such as the United Nations, the Supreme Court, the Council on Foreign Relations. But he is best known for his groundbreaking research into the Federal Reserve and his best-selling book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And in fact, we've had Mr. Griffin on the program before several times talking about his book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Many of you have even picked it up as a result of this interview. And Mr. Griffin, thank you so much for joining us on Follow the Money.
Well, Jerry, thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here.
Well, most of our audience is familiar with your fantastic work, that 600-page book on the Federal Reserve, opened in so many people's eyes, and certainly in this new era that we find ourselves in, where people are beginning to fully now wake up and realize what has been done to their country, what has been done to them, what has been done to their money. Your book has certainly become a touchstone that allows people to really figure out what's happening. Why don't we begin by you just kind of sharing what's been on your mind and your heart lately? There's so many different things happening. What have you been focused on recently, research-wise?
Well, yeah, that's a surprising question because I was getting all mentally geared up to delving into the issues of money and banking and that sort of thing. But what I'm focusing on now is very near and dear to my heart, Jerry. It has to do with solutions. You know, we run around like chickens with our heads cut off, and we go here, go there. We have no direction. Or maybe a better analogy is we're putting out fires that are being started all over the place, and the new ones starting faster than we can put out the old ones. And very seldom do people stop and say, wait a minute, why am I putting out fires without finding the arson who's setting the fires? And so I've been in that mode for quite a while, and, in terms of focusing on solutions rather than just reacting to problems. And for the last 10 years now, 15 years, I've been involved in an organization I created called Freedom Force International, which is a stab in the dark for me when I created it back in, it was 2002. Didn't know whether this would work or not, but as we have grown and had experience, it's apparent to me now that for some miraculous reason, the basic concepts that we put together are working. And nothing like this has ever worked before. So what it boils down to is that we are building an organization of people all around the world. That's why we call it Freedom Force International, in recognition of the fact that the problems we face here in the United States are pretty much the same problems faced by all of the developed nations of the world. And basically that problem can be summarized as the growth of government power. And the flip side of that coin is the diminishing of personal freedom, because they go hand in hand. The larger the government is, the more power it has, well, then the smaller are the individuals and their freedoms on the other side of the coin. So we've been engrossed in solving that problem, and we're making great progress. Anybody who is interested in how we're approaching that, I invite them to come to our website, which is freedomforceinternational.org, and read all about it, as they say.
I follow your unfiltered news, and I know how much time that must take you to put that out. It's such a labor of love. And in fact, as I look at your career, Mr. Griffin, it seems as if your career really has been a labor of love, and the fact that you have really tried to give back. What I really like about your work is that I can tell that whenever you discover something for your own benefit, you realize that it's not just for you. It's meant for other people. And there's other people out there who may not have time to sit down and research. They may not have the luxury of spending time delving into some of these philosophical topics, or even these solutions, discovering solutions. And I love the fact that you're passionate about helping people in that respect. Tell us a little more about Freedom Force International. I see that I'm reading here on the website is a network of men and women from all parts of the world who are concerned over loss of personal liberty and expansion of government power. Tell me what the method is. How are you succeeding? What does that look like?
Well, the basic ingredient, there's several basic things that make Freedom Force substantially different than any other group or movement in history, at least on our side of the struggle. There have been plenty of totalitarian organizations. I mean, let's take a look at those ideological movements which have come to power around the world, some of which we've even fought wars against. I mean, the Nazis had Adolf Hitler and his Mein Kampf, a statement of principles and beliefs and programs and strategies. And, of course, the communism has had its Lenin and its Stalin and its Marx and they have an ideology and a strategy and an organization and so forth. But on the other side of this thing, what have we got? Well, we've got nations, of course. Closest we've ever gotten to a statement of what we believe and so forth would be, in my view, would be the United States Constitution. But there's a lot of vagaries about that. People say, well, what does that mean? Why is it written that way? It's not really a statement of purpose. It's just a foundation for a nation built on excellent principles. But in many cases, the principles were not spelled out. They were not advocated. No organization was created to perpetuate those principles and so forth. So it dawned on me some years ago that the side of freedom in this battle against tyranny has never had its manifesto. It's never had its organization of dedicated members to carry out, fill a program, and to implant ideas into the consciousness of the people and so forth. It just never had it. And so Freedom Force really is designed to fill that void. So we start off with a statement of principles, Jerry. We feel that we have to believe in something. It's easy to know what you don't like. If you live under a totalitarian system, no matter where it is and what nationality it is, it's easy to say, hey, I don't like this. This system is denying my freedom, my privacy. It's taking away the substance of my livelihood. It's putting me into near slavery. I'm working hours and hours and hours to support somebody else or some structure, some organization. They're using my money and my brain power and my manpower to do things of which I disapprove. And it's easy for people to feel the yoke of oppression, and they rise up, and they, in many cases, historically, they will, at great cost and treasure and blood, they will overthrow the tyrant. But what happens then? They find out that, well, a few years later, they got another one just like it, because they're focused on the tyrant. They're focused on the personality, that this is a bad man, this is a bad king, this is a bad ruler, or this is a bad president, or this is a bad political party, or something. They're focused on things other than what they should be focusing on, which is the ideological principles that these bad people and these bad organizations believe in. Nobody talks about principles today, except in general terms, But getting right down to the nitty-gritties, we just have never had our manifesto. So, Freedom Force is different in the sense that it has a creed of freedom, a statement of this we believe. We believe this, and we believe it for this reason, and these are our principles. So when we go onto the battlefield, so to speak, the ideological battlefield, and fight against these isms that are determined to take away our liberties, we know where we stand. We're not just saying we dislike this person because he's corrupt, or that he's mean, or that he's even wrong. We fight this person because his principles are wrong, and we're not interested in replacing him with somebody else who has the same principles. So then the next thing is to determine what those principles are. What is this thing we're fighting? Well, it's called collectivism. So one of the major challenges for Freedom Force is to put that word, collectivism, back into the languages of the world. About 80 or 100 years ago, collectivism was commonly used and understood by educated people. Today, it's very difficult to find the word, and certainly even more difficult to find people who understand what it means. But when you look at all of these totalitarian isms, the communism and fascism and Nazism and all these other isms, you say, well, what's the difference between them? Well, it's really hard to find a difference between them if you start delving down into the ideological foundation for them. In fact, you find out that there is no difference. They're all just different variations of the same thing called collectivism. I'll just give you an example. One of the basic tenets of collectivism, we've identified about 8 of them. There are many more, but there are 8 really significant ones. One of the most important ones is that collectivists believe that the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. That's a phrase that comes up a lot. I was taught that in school. I was taught collectivism in school, not by that name, but I was just taught that in a democracy, is one of those words, that the greater good of the greater number, it must always be supreme, and individuals must sacrifice their their freedom, or whatever else, even their lives, for the greater good of the greater number. Well, you find that philosophy in communism and fascism and Nazism and all the totalitarian systems, because somebody has to represent that greater number, and lo and behold, it always turns out to be a party or a group of people who derive great power over society by claiming that they represent the greater good of the greater number, that they represent the state or the collective or the group of some kind. So that's a very short introduction to what collectivism is all about. But anyway, we do know what the enemy is, and it's not the Democrat Party or the Republican Party or the Nazi Party or the Communist Party. It's an ideology, and it's called collectivism. And then the final piece of the puzzle is, what do we do about it? So we understand that that's the problem. We understand that these people have acquired power over us by moving into the power centers of society. By that, we mean those are the groups and organizations that people belong to, and they have leaders and they follow it. Primary power centers, of course, are the agencies of government and the political parties, but there are many more. I mean, there are church organizations, labor unions, educational institutions, media centers, all of the things that influence public opinion in any society are called the power centers of society. And those are the things, those are the groups that are today in the hands of collectivists. And they use that power, that influence of leadership to drive their nations always in the direction of more and more collectivism. So, and we know how they got there. That's one of the things we've discovered, is that it wasn't just a chaotic happenstance. They got into those positions of power because they had a plan to get there. They knew they had to control society in that fashion. And so they had schools and textbooks and workshops on how to come to power, how to go into politics, how to go into the media centers, how to manipulate public opinion, how to rule, in other words. They're a dedicated cadre of how to run the world. And meanwhile, all of the rest of us are standing around saying, my, what's happening to us? What's happening to our freedoms? I wonder what's going on here. And we go to the polls every 2 years or so. We vote for candidates that are selected by this little elite group that we don't even know exists for the most part. And we think, well, how come I keep voting for different candidates, different parties, but it's always the same? That we have the answers to those questions, and we know how they came to power, and now we have to reverse that process. And now we have to find people who, on our side of this ideological conflict, are willing to get out there into the real world, get off of their couches, get out there where the people are, and assume leadership responsibilities in the power centers of society. Now, in a nutshell, that's what it's all about. It takes almost a day to go through all of that in detail. But, Jerry, I'm really glad you asked. I hope your listeners find that interesting, because I think it is the only solution to our problem. If we want to put out the fires that are being set all around us, that are destroying our way of life, we've got to find the arsons who are setting those fires and replace them with people who have no axe to grind except liberty.
You're listening to the passionate voice of G. Edward Griffin. He is the author of a very popular book now entitled The Creature from Jekyll Island. And he's been talking about his organization, Freedom Force International, freedomforceinternational.org on the web. Mr. Griffin, there is a Bible verse in Ecclesiastes 1:18 I was thinking about when you were talking, and it says that with much wisdom comes much sorrow, with much knowledge comes much grief. And it seems as if the more you go down the rabbit hole and you begin to realize how crooked and how wicked and how corrupt these systems that we now have to put up with are, it can be very depressing. But yet I still sense a sense of positivity in your voice, even after decades of fighting this battle and trying to wake up folks. What gives you hope?
Two things give me that hope, Jerry. The first one is you. You represent a lot of people out there. You are not part of this cabal. You want to see justice, freedom, liberty, truth. You're not out there trying to rule mankind for its own good, and as long as they recognize that you are the one that will make those decisions. In other words, I think there's about a 15% of the population that I refer to as the predator class. These are the people that gravitate into positions of power and authority. They want to rule everybody's lives. They want to plunder everybody legally and so forth. And they're the ones that wind up running the world. You are not in that group. We're indignant over this thing. And all we need is two things. We need to be aware of it, first of all, which most of us have not been. It's hard to be aware of it when it's hidden from your view by those who are running the show, and then they're telling you that anybody that talks like this is just a conspiracy theorist or something like that. It's hard to find the truth, but people are seeking the truth, and the truth is getting out. That's very hopeful to me, because I know that we have the numbers on our side. And the other thing is this Freedom Force that we're talking about. At last, for the first time in history, as far as I can see, we have a mechanism to bring truth to the fore. Truth has always been trampled underfoot. People that say, truth will always prevail, they're kind of living in a dream world. History teaches that truth is often trampled underfoot. Truth is often buried, it's denied, it's pilloried, it's executed. Truth has a very bad record as far as its victories in the past. Yes, in the long run, I suppose truth does ultimately prevail, but in getting to that position, there's an awful lot of chaos and death and destruction, evil that happens, and I'm not content with that, and I know you're not either. So it may not happen, definitely may not happen in my lifetime. I'm an old guy. But it's going to happen now. I can see we've set in motion certain patterns and organizational structures and strategies. It's in motion now. It can't be stopped. I think it's going to take maybe a generation or two before this thing gets straightened around, and there's going to be a lot of havoc and a lot of suffering in the meantime. But I keep looking ahead, and I go to sleep at night, and I think, it's going to be really bad. In fact, it's already really bad for millions and millions of people on this planet. And it's probably going to get pretty bad here in this country, too. And that's a grim thought. But then I have this smile on my face that thinks that I keep thinking to myself, well, yes, but at the end of all of this, we will prevail. And that's a good thought. And I'd like to be a part of laying the foundation for that reform.
My guest today is G. Edward Griffin. We're talking about his organization, Freedom Force International, freedomforceinternational.org on the web. Let's shift gears just for a moment here, Mr. Griffin, and let's talk about one other thing that I'm really curious about what your thoughts are. The United States, as you've pointed out, is no doubt faced with all kinds of challenges, the economic challenges, of course, being some of the most pronounced problems facing us, but of course the political gridlock and the fact that people still believe the right-left paradigm. But let's talk about the other side of the world for a moment, and let's talk about China. China has been in this multi-decade rise, I guess, for at least the last 50 to 60 years. They are no stranger to empire historically. They have been a country that has long been hegemonic in its power, especially over the Far East region. And now we see that they are becoming even more aggressive with their new Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is going to seek to challenge the World Bank. Of course, they're building out this revised version of the Silk Road, reviving that old Silk Road with a marine route and with a land route. Of course, we're seeing the continued internationalization of the Chinese yuan currency with all kinds of movement afoot on that. So I'm very curious. You've had a lot to say over the years about the United States and where it's going, but I'm really curious on your view about the reemergence of China and how concerned you are about that, especially considering America's weakness now. How concerned are you about China, and should Americans be concerned about it in general?
That's a really good question, and it may be that your listeners won't like parts of my answer to that. It may sound like I'm not a loyal American, and I want to assure everybody that I love this country, and the displeasure I have about it is what's being done to it by people who I don't think love America. But anyway, to answer your question, yes, I'm very concerned about, let's just call it what it is in my mind. It is a threat to the United States that is posed by China. And people may not understand why is China a threat. It's because they don't understand that at the leadership levels of the Chinese regime, there is a great desire to destroy America. And they still consider, in their words, that the United States is enemy number one. That's historic to some extent. It's ideological to some extent, but it's real. China and its leadership will smile and participate in commercial activities with the United States, and they will purchase our debt, they'll participate in trade agreements and all that sort of thing. But behind it all, I am convinced that their main motive is not only to prosper, but to prosper sufficiently that they can destroy America and conquer it and pillage it. They want to really incorporated into part of their empire, as you say. And I would never worry about the United States being able to resist that kind of a threat, except lately, and by that I mean in the last decade or two, the United States has stopped being America. It has stopped being the system that I was born into. It has become more like China. It has become more like the very thing that is now threatening it. In other words, it has become collectivist. We talk about free markets in America. They don't exist to any reasonable extent. It's all a command economy today, in spite of the lip service we give to the free market. It's very much the same as in China. And when I think of the relative emergence of China to the United States, and I use the word relative advisedly, because it is that. If the United States was continuing on its original course, there would be no comparison. The productivity of the U.S. would be far, far in excess of China. But the reason that China appears to be gaining on the United States is partly because the United States is falling. Kind of reminds me of the financial markets, where the commentators come on the airwaves every day and they talk about the value of the dollar fell today by 3 points compared to the euro, or the euro is up over the dollar today, and so forth. And it's as though they were comparing the reliability of these currencies, when in fact, when the dollar goes up, it's only because the euro fell. And in reality, all of the currencies of the world are falling because they're all fiat currencies. They're losing purchasing power, but some are falling more rapidly than others, and so that those which are falling least rapidly, we say, well, they grew strong today in the market. So, what I'm trying to say is that it's a relative thing. And so when I look at the growth rates, so-called, between the United States and China, I see a similar phenomenon going on. China, I think, it's expanding its production, but it's also losing a lot of ground internally. There's a lot of poverty and dysfunction within the Chinese system. So basically what I'm trying to say is that, yes, I am concerned. I don't think that what lies ahead bodes well for the United States, no matter what happens. I mean, if the United States continues to fall, it will definitely, economically, as long as it has a strong military, I don't think we have to worry too much about the China threat. But you cannot support a strong military forever if the economy is kaput and if people are in the streets rioting for food and jobs. You don't have a strong military anymore unless you become a totally tyrannical system. And then you're just like China, or just like old Mao Zedong China, or you're just like communist Russia or Nazi Germany. So no matter how you look at the future, Jerry, it doesn't look good to me, and I don't see any way out except for America to restore itself to its basic principles. That's the only solution in my view.
My guest today has been G. Edward Griffin. His website, freedomforceinternational.org. I encourage you to go there. In our final moments, Mr. Griffin, if our listeners who have listened to this interview, if they want to reach out, become a part of the Freedom Force International group, if they want to support your work that you're doing, how can they best serve you? How can they best help you in your work?
Well, the best thing to do is to become part of our movement. It is a movement. I was going to call it an army. It's an ideological army, and that analogy is good only in the sense that armies need recruits. You need support. So we're growing very rapidly and very firmly, but we sure could use some more help. We have members in about, I think it's last time I counted it was about 60 different countries, and that's very impressive. And it confirms the idea that we had originally that this is a global problem. It's not just in the United States. So the first thing to do is check us out, check our ideology out, make sure that you agree with the creed of freedom, then answer a couple of little questions like, do you want to make a difference in the world, or are you content just to ride along? Do you want to just complain about it or do something about it? And finally, are you willing to take a stand? Because we're living in times now where people don't want to be noticed. They say, well, leave me out of it. Good luck to you, but don't get me involved, and this sort of thing. Well, we're not looking for people like that. People who want to make a difference and who are willing to take a stand and become part of the Guardians of Liberty. Then I'd say, come and join us, and we'll be glad to have you on our team.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, and we'll look forward to having you back on soon.
Thank you, Jerry, and good luck to you.